It's finally your episode. Welcome back to another episode of Autumn Abroad. On this episode, we'll be talking about how we got our 50-pound standard poodle overseas to live in London with us. Bear with me, viewers. I am getting over a cold, so I am a tad nasally. Before we jump into logistics, let's talk about Molly. We have had Molly for 5 years, going on 6. We adopted Molly when she was 2 years old. I found Molly on Craigslist and I emailed the owner saying we were interested in adopting Molly. She said I was the first person who reached out to her out of all the inquiries, and so if we wanted her, she's ours. The family lived in Michigan, which was about a 3-hour drive from Chicago. So we rented a car, drove straight there, picked her up, drove 3 hours home, and that's how our family grew by 1. This is a long-awaited video by a lot of my viewers. They're so curious how we got her overseas and how much did it cost. Long story short, we did use a pet relocation service. The service was called World Care Pets, and it came as a recommendation from my cousin who actually moved to London a few years ago with his husband. They had 2 dogs at the time, and they had a really positive experience working with World Care Pets. So naturally, after all of our research, that was the company that we decided to go with, and I'm so happy that we did. Why did we decide to use a pet relocation service? It was our understanding that it is very risky and time-consuming and complicated to do the pet relocation paperwork ourselves, and we didn't want to take any chances for Molly not being able to live in the country. Because of that, we did spend the extra money to hire a pet relocation service who honestly took care of everything, and it was absolutely worth the money. We have friends who did not use a pet relocation service moving from the US to Europe, and day of travel, apparently one of their documents wasn't formatted correctly to the country they were moving to. There was a chance that their dog was not able to fly with them. Every country has their own specific format that they want documents in. Every country has specified vaccines that your pet needs to have before living in the country. Every country has a different timeline of getting vaccines, getting documents in order before they even fly out. So we thought it was best and easiest to work with the company who specializes in all of these timelines and document formats to ensure that Molly was able to get to London safely and she could stay with us. Everybody's favorite question, how much did it cost to get our dog overseas? The total cost was around $6,000. A lot of that cost came from the size of the dog. So Molly's a very large 50-pound dog. She's not necessarily heavy, but she's very long and she's very tall. So that comes into play with the size of the crate that we had to buy. The services from World Care Pet for her size was $5,000, and the crate itself was $250. We were able to buy that off Amazon ourselves with the help of our pet relocation specialist telling us which crate to buy that met the airline's standards. On top of that, we had to pay about $600 to $700 for the International Health Certificate, which is essentially the main document giving Molly the okay to fly and for the UK government to accept her into their country. So with all that said, it was about $6,000. Now, that's a lot of money, don't get me wrong. We're fortunate enough to be able to spend that money to have a pet relocation company move her abroad and help us with the paperwork and get everything organized and our ducks in a row. So I'm very thankful that we were able to work with World Care Pets. So they were able to make sure the process was really easy, seamless, and kind of put our minds at ease because it was very stressful just thinking about everything that could happen. So once we decided on World Care Pet, We had a virtual meeting with our consultant from the company who was essentially holding our hand through the entire process. We went over everything that needs to be done before Molly could even get on the plane overseas. Things that we needed to ensure Molly could fly overseas. We needed to make sure she was microchipped, which she is, and we have the microchip number. We needed a valid rabies certificate and up-to-date vaccines, which she has. We had to get an international health certificate endorsed by the USDA, which means that we had to find a USDA accredited vet in order to fill out that paperwork and assess Molly to make sure that she was fit to fly. A few days before flying, Molly had to get a deworming treatment because that is also required by the UK. Last but not least, we needed an airline-approved crate to make sure that Molly could stand up in the crate fully, turn around fully, and lay down. World Care Pet did have an option to include a crate in our package that we could rent from them, but we chose to do it ourselves to save on cost. It was cheaper through Amazon than adding it to our package with World Care Pet. All documents had to be original with ink-signed signatures, and all of the documents had to be aligned in a specific format that the UK does require. For example, the original rabies certificate that we had for Molly in Chicago, it was not in the correct format. So essentially, our pet relocation specialist had to reach out to Molly's vet in Chicago, ask them to reformat it according to the UK standards, and then we had to get it reprinted and signed in ink by the vet. Now, a challenge that we had specifically is we had to be out of our condo in Chicago before we moved to the UK because we were renting out our condo and we had to have at least a week in between us being there and the renters in order for a company to come in and clean the place and make sure it was move-in ready. So because of that, we were not able to use the same vet that we go to in Chicago to get Molly's international health certificate completed. So I found a vet in the suburbs closer to my parents where we were staying who was USDA accredited, and they were able to see Molly, fill out the paperwork, and get it endorsed by the USDA. So we didn't have to drive to the city 2 times in 1 week in order to get everything situated. Something to note about all of Molly's vet appointments leading up to her flight is they had to be X number of days out. Molly had to have 2 separate vet appointments before her flight. The first vet appointment had to be within 10 days of her flying out. And in this appointment, the vet gave her a general checkup to make sure that she was fit to fly, she could handle the journey, and she had to fill out the international health certificate and then send it by mail to the USDA to get endorsed. Molly had to go back to the vet a second time within 5 days of flying for her deworming treatment, which is required by the UK. To my knowledge, it was just a pill that she took. And we had to collect the endorsed international health certificate from the USDA. The final original document had a little raised seal on it, so you would know it's authentic. The vet also gave us a second document allowing Molly to fly in colder weather, meaning below 20 degrees Fahrenheit. So with the regular international health certificate, pets can essentially fly above 20 degrees Fahrenheit, no problem. When it drops below 20 degrees Fahrenheit, that's where it gets a little tricky, where some animals, especially the smaller animals, they're not able to handle the cold. And the pet relocation service and the airline wants to make sure that the animals are not uncomfortable in their journey. They want to give them a really safe, comfortable environment as much as they can. Since Chicago has very cold weather in the winter, they actually have heated trucks to transport live animals from the cargo hold warehouse to the bottom of the plane. The outside that the animal would experience is between the heated truck to the inside of the plane. If you think about if you've ever seen baggage being loaded onto a plane, the luggage rolls up to the plane in a truck. There are workers that take the suitcases, put them on a conveyor belt that go up into the plane. Somebody's in the cargo hold, they take the suitcase and throw it in. Animals that fly, they essentially are in cargo, but it's a separate section from where luggage is. The separate section for live animals in cargo is pressurized for oxygen, and it's also temperature controlled. There are no cameras in there. The pilots are aware that there are animals on their plane, but they can't see them. The animals also sit in darkness because they've done studies where animals settle faster when it's dark versus if there were lights on in the cargo hold. Molly's flight was booked within 2 weeks of us flying out. Airlines release pet tickets 2 weeks out. So that was something our pet relocation specialist handled. She was able to look up the pet flights from the airline. She was able to book everything. If she needed to change anything last minute, she had full control over that. So that was another reason that we did hire the company, so they could handle that whole kind of aspect of the journey instead of us trying to figure out how our family's getting over there, all the stress behind that. Now we have to wait for Molly. Molly actually flew out the day after us. The reason being is that flights from Chicago to London are typically a red eye. So with that said, we didn't know how long she would be in customs and how long we had to wait at the airport to pick her up, knowing we had all of our luggage, we had a toddler with us, we all just had an 8-hour flight. We just wouldn't be in the right headspace to wait around for her and deal with everything at the same time. So we had Molly fly out the day after us so we could sleep in our new apartment. And then when Molly arrived in London the next morning, my husband went to the airport and retrieved her and brought her home safely. When Ian picked Molly up from Heathrow Airport in London, he met her at a building that was near the airport, that was on the airport grounds, but it was not a building that people typically depart from. It was a separate building just for live animal cargo. So when he picked her up, she seemed very happy to see him. She seemed relieved that we didn't just abandon her, ship her off on a flight, never to be seen from again. She's a member of our family. We couldn't leave her behind. When Molly's crate arrived from Amazon, we had to start crate training. This was only about 3 weeks before we left, and so we definitely needed to work on it as soon as possible in order to make sure that she could get in her crate around strangers, hence the pet relocation company, and they wouldn't have any trouble getting her in and jeopardize her being able to fly. Molly's crate was massive. I don't think I can explain through photos and videos how massive her crate was. You had to see it in person to really understand the magnitude of this thing that we were dealing with. Molly's crate was so big that it would not fit through a door frame unless you had to disassemble it. Came in 2 pieces. You had to put them through the door frame sideways because the crate was too tall and wide that it would not fit through a door frame. So every time we had to move it from room to room or house to house or car to car, we had to take it apart. And it was very heavy, mind you. The crate itself had to be taller than Molly so she could stand up completely on all 4s. And the crate also had to be longer than Molly because she had to be able to turn herself all the way around while standing up and lay down comfortably. Molly doesn't weigh a ton. She's about 50 pounds, just under, but she's all legs. She's super tall, she's super lengthy, and so her height and length were definitely at a disadvantage for having to get this giant crate. In order to crate train Molly, we started off with taking the bottom half of the crate and putting it in our room with a blanket for comfort and warmth. The blanket also smelled like us, so it gave Molly a sense of security. We encouraged Molly to get in the crate with some treats. Once she was getting in and out comfortably all on her own, say sleeping in it overnight, when we got in bed, she got in her crate, then we would move on to the next step of putting the top on. Same thing, we used treats to kind of lure her inside, get comfortable being in this new environment. Once Molly slept in her crate with the top and bottom on through the night, then we added the door just to make sure that we could shut it for a little bit and she wasn't going to freak out. The door itself was definitely a last minute. We just needed to make sure that she could really get in her crate without anybody having to force her in, and she would get in all on her own. And then once the door shut, the pet relocation service essentially zip ties it closed for safety throughout the flight. So the biggest hurdle was really just getting Molly in the crate all on her own. Molly did not like her crate in the beginning because without the blanket, the bottom of the crate bowed whenever you stepped on it. So every time Molly stepped in the middle of the crate, it bowed and it freaked her out and she would back up and abandon the mission. So obviously couldn't have that. Took a lot of time, took a lot of work, took a lot of treats, but she got there and we're so proud of her and she was able to fly. Day of travel, my husband, my daughter and I, we are already in the UK. My mom had to take Molly with her disassembled crate, all the screws and nuts and bolts and the door, her file of documents that I made sure were in order, double, triple, quadruple checked it. My mom met a individual from the pet relocation company outside of O'Hare Airport in Chicago. Once my mom connected with this individual, they were able to go into the cargo section of the airport together. The pet relocation specialist was able to put the crate together. They were able to take Molly on a walk. My mom was able to stay with her while they checked in all of her paperwork and then made sure that Molly was able to get comfortable in the crate, having somebody there that she is familiar with and not just a stranger. Very thankful my mom was able to be there and do that for us since we couldn't be there and do it ourselves. Took a few hours with meeting with the pet relocation specialist, finding the cargo section of the airport, making sure that Molly's paperwork was all checked in and everything was exactly as it should be. All the formats were correct, all the documents were correct. Took a few hours, and so we're very thankful my mom was able to get that all done so Molly could fly. Molly had to check in for her flight 6+ hours ahead of time, and they actually had to push Molly's flight back a few hours because the truck that takes the live animals from the cargo warehouse to the actual airplane, the heated truck was not big enough for her crate. I told you it was massive. And so they had to push her flight to like the 10 p.m. flight a few hours later to make sure they had a big enough truck to fit her crate so they could get her from the cargo warehouse all the way to the cargo hold in the plane. The day of flying, Molly could only eat breakfast the morning of. Molly should not be eating during the flight or have any toys in her crate to prevent any sort of choking hazards that may or may not occur during the flight. Since no one is in the cargo hold with the animals, they want to make sure that there is the least amount of risk as possible of anything happening. A lot of people ask if we sedated Molly for her flight, and we actually were not able to sedate her in any way, shape, or form. If there was any suspicion of her being sedated, then that would actually risk her flying and would jeopardize her not being able to fly. I believe the reason that you're not supposed to sedate an animal for the flight is because if anything goes wrong in the cargo hold in terms of breathing, there's nobody in the cargo hold that can help the animal, and it's actually more dangerous to have them under medication and not functioning properly After Molly was checked in for her flight and after my mom drops her off, the pet relocation specialist did notify Ian and I via WhatsApp. We were in constant communication with them ever since she got to the airport. They also notified us when she got on the plane, when she was in the air, scheduled to land, when she was on the ground, and when she was done with customs. Customs in London took about 3 hours, but we were told on average it can be as long as 8 hours, which is another reason we didn't want to wait for her the day that we flew into London, just in case it took the full 8 hours. We had all of our luggage, we had a toddler, we were not going to wait around the airport for 8 hours, and we were not going to travel an hour outside of the airport to drop off our luggage and then travel an hour back to the airport to pick Molly up. We wanted to make sure we had 2 separate days for everything that we needed to do so we could focus our full attention on getting settled in and picking up Molly. It did take Molly a few days to adjust. We received an after travel guide from our pet relocation specialist telling us to introduce water slowly, introduce food slowly, with standard poodles specifically. If they eat too quickly, they can develop bloat in their stomach, which essentially means that their stomach enlarges and bloats to the point where it starts twisting and it can turn very deadly. So I'm kind of glad they told us about that after she landed and not before, because I was absolutely hyper-focusing on her when she got home and the next few days. And that's not something I needed to add to my plate before I even flew out of Chicago. On the next episode of Autumn Abroad, I'll be showing how my family and I moved here to the UK from the States. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.